Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan, Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this to another level.
What's a purpose that inspires you right now in this day and time? Because purpose will pull you further and further into your wholeness. It's fear and safety that keeps us acting in these labels, roles, containers that are too small for what the world needs right now.
Who is Peggy Mcallister?
Oh, that's a question we could go on for days. And you could ask 2,000 people and they'd have 2,000 different responses. My response today is in my work, I work as an executive coach, and I do what I would call the deeper inner work with leaders versus consulting with them about how to be more strategic. I'm helping them look at the ways that some internal ways that they process things get in the way of being strategic. And with teams, I started my career as a university counselor, so I have a graduate degree in psychology. So the deeper work has always been of interest to me. And it took me a while to find my way into doing that with executives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you think is like that deeper work? A lot of times we're so biased or sometimes jumping into that strategic work, and it could be maybe because of our, how we're incentivized. But what are you seeing like when you're coaching, when you're working with leaders on that inner work and working on themselves? And, what are some of the things that, or maybe patterns that you're seeing when you work with leadership on what are some of the things that they struggle, maybe some of the things that they get easier, but maybe the environment doesn't allow them to act in a way that maybe they feel is a whole or more organic way of doing things? Because a lot of times I talk to people and they're like, Miljan, I know this is the right thing to do, but guess what? I also have a college student and I have to pay their tuition. So I have to do what I'm incentivized for.
Yes. So many people these days are hitting up against that edge of I've been doing what my company, what society has said I need to do, and I don't feel like I can do it for much longer, or I can't do it anymore. So there has been, I think, and we're going in a direction, I don't know, let's see where this goes. But so many people right now are just done with living up to other people's expectations, which is different from being in service to something that matters. And I want to make that distinction. But what I'm seeing with a lot of my own clients is I've been doing this, I'm really good at this, and it's feeling really empty. I'm exhausted, and I want to do something that has more meaning for me, not because I'm going to lose salary or lose the esteem of my colleagues.
Or even identity. Like sometimes it's like, I'm going to lose my identity. This is what people have known. And then like letting go of that maybe identity. So could we explore like what is identity and why does it matter in leadership?
Yeah, that's where I really like to play. So identity, as I would describe it today, is a story that you have believed about who you need to be. Not even exactly who you are, but who you need to be in order to be okay, in order to be successful. So for some of us, as little ones, if we were gifted with being an athlete and we were always winning the awards, we grow up thinking that's how I be the best me. I've got to just keep winning the awards. Or if I'm the one who is always the responsible one in the family, We often carry that into our work, and we're taking other people's work on. No, it's not a problem. No problem. Give it to me. Other people learn to be the nice person. So always denying their own needs and taking care of everyone else. And all of these things lead to burnout if they are not managed at some point. So a lot of high achievers are burning out right now. They don't give themselves permission to take a break, because if my identity is I'm always at the top, I'm always making those numbers, I'm always exceeding the numbers. If that is the case, then if I stop, I must be a failure. If I just pause and go do something that has nothing to do with succeeding, I'm failing. And that's not okay with who I am.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you say that, because I've been in several situations like that where, like, you think that's the case, and then the only thing that like separates you from that identity and then different perspective is just actually letting go of that identity and just trying something for like so short, where your perspective changes and you're like, how silly was I to think that? And I don't know, do you see that? Is that like, sometimes is that what it takes? Just letting go, even for a little second, and saying, what's the worst thing that could happen?
That's a great question. And what's funny is with these identities, there is some sense of danger of stepping outside of it that we can't even name. Like if I said, tell me what you think could happen, your brain can't come up with it, but your nervous system feels some sort of danger 911 alert. I can't step beyond that edge. Can I tell a story about how the identity is formed? Can I just give this, because this might serve as a metaphor for the rest of our conversation. And this is a story told by a wise one from 150 years ago or so, who grew up around many nomadic tribes would come through his town. So he began to get to know them. And he followed them and he learned a lot. He was always curious about what made things happen and how people thought about things. And this one tribe had very specific protocols that they followed that were passed down through the centuries around how we do everything. So everybody had a role. When a storm came up, you get the tent poles, you get the cooking stuff, you get the camels, blah, blah, blah. And they had one very specific thing that they did every week when the parents wanted to go off to gather the food. They would gather all the children in the oasis, and like the kids 10 and under. And one of the parents would take their finger and would start drawing a line, a circle in the sand around the outside of them. And so she'd go around, just drawing the circle around them. So imagine you're sitting in this circle. And she says to them, and they hear this every week from one or the other parents, if anyone crosses this line, you're going to die. Now imagine you hear that every week as you're growing up. If anyone crosses this line, you're going to die. Every time you stop at an oasis and parents have to go away. So now imagine that Miljan is seeing his 18-month-old cousin, Joanna, crawling around, getting really close to that line. She's just curious. She's just, wow, this is so cool where we are. Oh my goodness. And Miljan sees her getting close to that line. What are you going to do as she gets close?
Yeah, probably pull her back, right?
You're going to pull her back. Yeah. And what kind of energy is going to be in the pulling her back? If you've been told every week of your 10 years of life that you're going to die if you cross the line, how are you going to pull her back?
Like probably very reactively and very, you know, I don't think I will be probably gentle. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, you'd probably be pretty forceful. No, stop. And so Joanna and you, through the years, through the months, got this in your nervous systems that that line is a no. And so now imagine it's 20 years later and I meet you on the street and I'm saying, Milan, I hear you now have a family. Tell me more. And we're talking. And as we're talking, I'm getting down on the ground, looking like I'm picking something up, but I'm really drawing a circle around your feet in the sand. And then I say, Milan, come here a minute. And I walk 50 yards away. I want to show you this rose. Now you're standing there with the circle around your feet. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, and this is something that's bringing up is just like, it's such a simple story, but like if I really look at it in my life and like that metaphor of the line and how we've been shaped, like what's coming to me is, the cultural influence and the rituals. And that line, like there are things, it's not that line in my life, but there are certain things that represent that description and I might get really creative and say what's there, or like I might just in the back of my head maybe try to avoid for whatever reasons not to cross that line. And maybe like this is like I was thinking about this recently, how we do things and we believe things, but as we get older we get a little bit more creative and thoughtful about how we avoid things, or maybe how we perceive and deal with whatever story we tell ourselves or whatever we make up. But and you and I have had this discussion about growing up in another country, in a different culture, how you're shaped into by your society. So like when I came to United States, that identity that we talked about earlier started getting questioned, right? And as soon as I let go of what I thought I should be, what my culture and what I was as soon as I started suspending, like, hey, do I really think I am what has been handed down to me from others? It changes that identity. So I don't know if I answered your question as far as what I would do. I would say I would get creative not to get out of that circle as a metaphor if I'm still clinging to that identity, right? If I'm maybe gone past it, I might say, hey, yeah, no problem. Now, I don't cling to that identity or that ritual. So I might have no problem crossing it. But if I still cling to that identity, I would get pretty creative as far as not to, because there might be some fears, some.
Yes. Yes.
And that also another thing that maybe reminds me of is, and we don't have to go down the culture wise, but I come from a region where it's very cultural. We kill each other because of the culture and because of that identity.
Yes.
But it's that's another thing that we cling to it in a way that same way that we cling to religion. And like you might say, hey, if I do this, I'm going to go to hell, or I'm going to do this, and that line might represent 10 commandments, let's just say. So I'm not going to do that. So anyway, that I don't know if that answers your question, and but I wanted to explore that a little bit because and maybe we can bring it to like a professional setting. How could somebody have this that same feeling about decisions that they're making as a executive, right?
Yes, great. So I love how you've brought in all the nuances of identity too, because we have an identity that comes around our culture, our religion, our gender. I mean, there's our race. There are so many things that I am an X. And as soon as we say I am an X, we are looking through the lens of X, and we see everything in a way that supports that X until something cracks it open. So what the wise one who told this story said is that circle in the desert is actually a hypnotic trance, because the kids weren't going to, we know the kids weren't going to die if they crossed the line. And it was a way to keep them safe, which is what the start of our identity is about. It's to keep us safe.
Mhm.
So
So it's a survival kind of mechanism.
it's a survival, and it's an enculturation mechanism. Yeah, it's a way to help us to fit in to our society somehow or another. And we all find our own ways. So 3 or 4 years ago, I was working with a guy who was a knockout superstar, like from high school. He was always the award winner, the leader. Everybody wanted him to take things over. So in this global multi-billion-dollar organization, he found like he was barely in a role for 6 or 8 months before they promoted him. And he got to a point where his old, the way he was used to getting things done was he was the quarterback on the football team. He was calling the plays, but he was also running most of the plays. So his organization was so huge, he couldn't do it all anymore. And so he came to me and he said, I need to find a new way, so he thought I was going to give him some new strategy and stuff. And I said, so let's call him Sam. Sam, what's been your success formula? Because obviously you're being recognized everywhere for what you bring. And he said, well, I just don't fail. I said, you don't? Like I was a little, And he said, no, very seriously, I don't fail. And I said, well, what would happen if you did? The room got silent, and I could feel this anger starting to fill the room. And I said, what's happening? He said, I am so ready to just walk out the door. And so we began just being curious. And this is what it takes to start unlocking some of these mechanisms that are driving us, that are not giving us any choice. We need to be curious. So somehow he stuck in there in the process and began getting curious. And he remembered that when he was a kid, his father gave him explicit instructions that you can't fail, because if you fail, you're a failure, and I won't ever talk to you. I mean, that was the message. You must be the winner, not even number 2. You always have to be number 1, or else something really horrible is going to happen. And he took that in, but it went into his subconscious. So it's not like he was always thinking, boy, dad's going to do this. But it was the circle in the sand that kept being drawn for him. And then he didn't even recognize he was in the circle. It was just who I am. I'm just the winner. My success formula, I just don't lose. When he saw that, and this doesn't usually happen this quick, but in that room, as he heard himself speak this, he said, that's a bunch of BS. I'm smart. I know how to do, how did I buy into that? And then he began saying, so what would it look like if I weren't the quarterback carrying all the plays? And he began being okay with experimenting with his team's not going to get it right the first time. They're going to have to run the plays. They're going to be learning, discovering. And within, I don't know, a very short amount of time, his team the revenue, all the markers way up, very short amount of time. And it took him being curious and sitting in that huge discomfort of, what do you mean I can't always win? What do you mean? And so when we get to that edge of, I'm supposed to be the winner, I'm supposed to be the one who has all the answers, when we're pushed to the edge of, what if that's not really so? If we can stay in that tension a bit and be curious, all sorts of new ways of bringing success to our teams, to our organizations are going to start moving. It opens up innovation. It opens up everything, because with Agile, curiosity is a key factor there.
Yeah, and that inspect and adapt and experience, experimentation and experience, the empiricism that Agile is specifically founded on is very interesting. So what I mean, like, why is that direct experience? And we're discussing about that inner work, like what's going on in our heads, and a lot of times, we can come across maybe too theoretical or too soft. Like, how do you help leaders practice this? Like, because I tell people, you can't just say you have to be more empathetic, or you have to look at, from somebody else's perspective. Like, I can say that, I can suggest, but it's the person that's making decision if they want to do that or not, right? So what type of things do you do maybe to help people experience or come up with that, oh shoot, now I see.
Shift. Make that aha.
I had somebody recently say, like they had that aha moment, and they're like, I now realize what kind of asshole I was to my team and to people that I work with. And it's like amazing, like, just because I've had sometimes those kind of realizations that I didn't see in retrospect, looking back. But that a lot of times is based through experience. You can see that, not maybe in the moment. So maybe could you share, like, what are some of the things as a coach that you do with executives and people that you coach? And
yeah, I would say one of the tools that I discovered 12, 13 years ago is called the Leadership Circle. And it's a brilliant tool for unlocking all of this. So it's a 360. And if you can picture a circle with an equator through the middle of it, the bottom of the circle will show all of the ways that your leadership is being sourced from fear. The top of the circle shows all of the ways that you source your leadership from a desire to make a difference, from a desire to be in service to something that's bigger than you. So the bottom are all the ways that we learned how to stay safe as a kid. And these ways are ways that we see everything as a problem and try and make sure that the problem gets solved, versus looking at what do we want to create is what we're asking at the top. And so leaders that I give this to, it's a 360. So they're asking 15 to 20 people in their organization to answer these questions that will then show them how others are experiencing them compared to how they experience themselves. And so the first step to unlocking these more reactive patterns that keep ourselves, our own gifts locked up, keep our organizations locked up, is to begin becoming aware of them. So if, for instance, you're shown that your biggest reactive tendency is to want to control everything, it's called autocratic. So you take the steering wheel no matter what. And that is keeping your team, your organization, from really developing their capacity to deliver. And you're keeping everything in a small little box. So what I first do with somebody doing this is I send them out to do some discovery work. and you just begin writing down all the instances when they have found that they are grabbing the steering wheel. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh my God, I knew I did it some. I'm doing it all the bloody time. Like 5 times in one meeting, I'm taking the steering wheel. And what I ask them to do is write down what was the story in your head when you took the reins? Like, what were you telling yourself about the situation? Why I need to take charge? The other person or people? What were you telling yourself about you? And as they begin like taking the curtains away, the blinders, and really paying attention to how they're processing their experience, that begins to, it's almost like the reactive is a mechanism that's stored back in their primitive brain, their lizard brain. And the way it keeps taking charge is that it hasn't come into consciousness. The drivers haven't. So as you begin tracking, what am I telling myself when I'm taking charge about all those things, the people, situation? You begin seeing patterns, and then, like Sam, you go, whoa.
Well, it's almost like I think the way that I describe it, and it's like either an operating system, so that reactive is one type of operating system, and then when you move to creative, it's a separate operating systems. And like within that operating system, you have like a lens that you're looking through. So as soon as you, and I tell people it's not necessarily an upgrade, it's a different operating system. And you're looking through a different lens through, and everything looks different once you start looking to that from a reactive in a creative way, right?
Yes, that's beautifully said. And I would also say it's like moving from DOS to Windows. DOS isn't bad. It's just not as sophisticated. It's not, it doesn't have the capacity that Windows does.
So maybe to expand this, and some of the readers are familiar with this concept, it's based on cognitive development, right? So even creative is not necessarily that integral, which is the operating system after this one, or the after the creative one. And a lot of people believe that in order to operate in today's environment and complex environment, we really need to upgrade to that integral view or more holistic view. What are your thoughts on that? Like, and most people are operating from creative and reactive operating, like 80 or so, generally speaking, over the years people have. So like, what are your thoughts in a sense of how do we progress? Because you can't also skip, you can't just upgrade to, how do we work with leaders that are maybe more reactive, that want to cling to that? And maybe coming back to that experience, is it maybe just helping them be more awareness and creating more and more awareness around what they're doing?
That's a huge piece of it. And they have to be ready. If you're not ready, you're not going to notice it. But I have to tell you that most of the time when I'm working with pretty reactive people, they're in pain. They're stressed. They don't want to be holding their whole life that tightly, but they are. So self-awareness is a key through all of it, through the reactive and the creative, to begin opening up your capacity. There's a theory by a guy named Michael Washburn called the Identity Project. And he describes this movement that we have into identity, and then as the identity begins dissolving. And if you picture a bell-shaped curve, when we're born, what he says is at the bottom, the foundation of our whole life, wherever we are, is what he calls the ground of being. Now that may sound woo-woo. You can, but it is when a baby is born, for instance, they don't know when a hand's hanging down, they don't know that's a me. That's just one more curiosity. Oh, that's something floating in the air. they feel and experience an interconnectedness with everything. That's the ground of being, this interconnected, like the ecosystem.
Is that what like Robert Keegan and others have called like the shift from subject to object? And what I mean by that, you start looking at your like like I've experienced it in a way like where it's tied to the identity, but you start looking at yourself from other perspectives, and you're almost like looking at yourself and trying to observe, what am I doing here? And that's really about awareness. I think if you can see, how am I coming across to others, how am I what am I seeing that they're not seeing, or what they're seeing that I'm not seeing? Is that like what we're talking about when it comes to awareness being
Yes,
more?
this mechanism that's driving the reactive, when it comes out and we begin noticing it begins unlocking. It begins, so
that's really, and like one of the I don't know if you've read the Sapiens, like from Noah Harari. It's a really good book about like essentially history of humankind. And for instance, that with my son being born and listening and reading to that was like that little shift, at least in my perspective, just like around my identity, like because it talks about those beliefs and identity that as humans, what we did in order to survive. And that was really tied to my identity growing up in the Balkans. And and then when I realized, like, I mean, it's funny as it sounds, but it's like, there's more to history than, last 5,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, right? And there's just certain things that start clicking in my head where like it's almost like that was part of at least my development. And when I started taking things, and looking, from more objective perspective, it was an interesting how my identity kind of shifted, or just how I process things, how I see things, not necessarily identity, which it did change, but it's also interesting that, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. And so being part of the, in the Balkans where I'm from, being Orthodox Christian, now if my friends are like all hardcore Orthodox Christians, let's just say, or Serbs or whatever, and we've, fought against Muslims, other Christians or Catholics. So like now if I'm saying like, I don't hate Muslims, I see them as, even though my father was in 3 different concentration camps, Muslim concentration camps, he himself said, like, there are only good and bad people. So, but your society still, expects you to act in certain ways. So like, if we go back to that person that was achiever in a sense, and dad, kind of ingrained this, that you have to be number one, his parents or his dad maybe still expects him to be number one, let's just say. So now you're dealing with this. Now I don't see things the way that my father does. I see, and that sometimes can be conflicting in our heads. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that piece, where you've transcended your old ways of thinking, but you're still, not necessarily, to some extent, influenced by those close to you that may not have.
Yes, I mean, this happens a lot in marriage. One partner has some big ahas and changes, and the other is still living in the old container. And how do you manage that? That is, again, there's no rules. It's a journey of discovery. It is, sometimes by living in a bigger way, just your presence can invite other people to step beyond the line of the circle. But nothing is going to convince somebody to cross that line until they're ready, until they've had the aha, until they've had this mechanism began becoming more clear, as you said, what has seemed like who I am, to be like, oh, this is a story about who I am. I'm like in the story with the desert. The kids had the whole desert. And we have this whole desert of who we are to express, but we live in a small slice of it. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, I mean, like, it's just, I'm curious, and like, this is more of a, like, as I said, like a discussion that doesn't, has some structure to it, but it doesn't. But I'm curious because, like, a lot of times I'm asking myself these questions, and you know, I love to hear other people's thoughts on it because I don't have the answers, and it's good to hear, you know, other people's perspectives. How do we lead effectively, like in today's environment? Like how, besides self-awareness, like, you know, what are some of the practices, even like, you know, a lot of times, and I still struggle with this, but meditation is one of the good practices to be self, you know, to kind of with all the craziness around ourselves. But how do we lead, you know, or as leaders, how can we lead more effectively?
Yeah, I think when you say meditation, slowing down and taking pauses is essential now. Just going for the sake of going is again being run by a part of your identity that told you if you stop, something horrible is going to happen. And for all of those questions that keep us at an edge, that keep us living out of old stories, is that really true? Is a great question. Is that really true that something horrible is going to happen if you just stop for a minute? If your organization is on a trajectory and you can tell, we need to stop here. We need to pause. We need to reassess. So pausing is critical right now. Making room for other perspectives is critical right now. So if we just go zoom, we tend to go with just our perspective. So we're missing all the perspectives. And we know in complexity, the more perspectives we bring in, I know like in scrums and things, you've got to have a lot of perspectives coming into what's the best solution. You can't just, okay, I know what we're doing, let's gear up and go. So this pause, this making room, this space, also, if we're spinning in our heads in stories, if we're just, oh my God, going from one thing to another, we fail to notice what's actually here that could be informing our next step. So slowing down, making room, listening, looking, what's actually.
Do you think like COVID, I agree, and I can relate to this story too, because I feel like lately, or at least over the last year or so, like I've done the same things. Like I gotta, you know, do this, I gotta do that, and I've been like, you know, and it's funny though because coming from a different country and coming like having something, especially my parents, and not having anything. So we've gone from having to not having. So like we've gone to that journey. So I know how it is. It's not like I tell people, it's not that bad, especially in the United States, not to have anything. There's so many opportunities, even back home, people. But like this fear of like, oh, what happens if I don't have enough work? What happens? So like I overcompensate by overworking. And then, you know, I'm like, okay, you know, at what point do I slow down and enjoy life? Right. And, you know, for instance, now I'm going to back home for 2 months and I'm trying to slow down and exactly like you're saying, like take that breather and almost I should be doing that more frequently and pacing it out. But I can relate with that to that. And it's, I think it's to some extent, it's that identity, but it's also maybe a little bit of fear too, or what's the, you know, what's going to happen if I don't you know, make enough where I can pay the bills and things like that. But deep down, I know like as humans, we figure things out. What's the worst thing that can happen, right? And it's interesting that you say that, because I can I can really relate to that too, and
So
it's easier said than that.
you've got this frontal lobes that are saying, what's the worst that can happen? But you've got this old mechanism that's wired for safety saying, I can't, oh my gosh, that's wired to look for threat. Where's the
Yeah.
threat, right?
Mhm.
So this telling this, we've got this, we're fine. If you don't notice that your fear is getting quieter, then
Mhm.
that might not be the mechanism that's going to help.
Mhm.
And right now, we're all being faced with our fears. You know, the world has put a lot of pretty dangerous situations in our face. So how do we walk in this? And I would say there is self-awareness,
Mhm.
giving ourselves pause, but also for those of us who are very self-sufficient, recognizing that we can't go alone anymore, that we've got to be all in this together.
Mhm.
So collaboration is important. The old paradigm of even things like IP, all
Mhm.
the things that might be limiting to, I own it, it's mine, that's not going to work anymore.
But that's going to be tough, because what you're saying is that's letting go of ego, and
It's going to be, it's asking a lot of all of us. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. And the part that have been the warriors protecting that line in the sand,
Mhm.
yeah, that
It's
line's
interesting.
been
Yeah.
triggered everywhere.
What are some, you run a retreat, I think, a couple of times a year,
Yeah.
and what is it called again?
It's called the return to wholeness.
Return to Wholeness. And I was seriously considering it, and I think that's maybe how I found
Mhm.
out or got introduced to some of your work. What does that mean, to return to wholeness, in the context of what we've been talking about?
Mhm. So um, we, I was beginning to tell you about Washburn, so I'll return to that.
Mhm.
We entered life not knowing there was a me that started and ended here. We experienced this interconnectedness of everything. But as we entered the identity, we went into a sense of separation. And so that's the moving into the reactive, where we're always looking around for, how can I stay safe? How can I stay loved? How can I stay belonging, connected?
Mhm.
Oh, if I do this, something's bad's going to happen. That's the reactive that begins developing as teenagers. We watch them. Oh my gosh, my hair is the part on the wrong side, that sort of.
Yeah.
And then we move into what the leadership circle calls the creative, which is the full flowering of the identity, which is,
Mhm.
I can do this, I can help make this happen. And we work with others, but there's still a lot of I and me. We're very
Mhm.
clear on our gifts and we use them well.
Mhm.
So if you picture the creative at the top of the bell-shaped curve, when we begin relaxing our grip on the identity, when we begin letting all of these stories of who I thought I needed to be, we hold them lightly and we
Mhm.
open more to being an instrument for some purpose
Mhm.
that's bigger than us. How can I be in
Mhm.
service? It's not about me anymore. It's about this larger thing. That is the return to, that's the beginning, the dissolving of this, I'm only this.
Mhm.
And
And that's
this,
almost like letting the returning to wholeness is letting go of that ego, because probably as a kid or as a newborn, you don't have much of an ego. It starts, like you said, growing, and probably
yeah,
as you become, yeah, more interesting. I haven't thought about it, from that perspective, but that makes a lot of sense. And I think another thing that maybe that we haven't talked about, but which is that that reactive side is still within us. So as you go to wholeness, like you still have that. It's just that our perhaps the current needs require us to operate or to upgrade, whatever you want to call it. But that reactive, if we still can pull on it, right, when we need to. So I think a lot of people misunderstand that, like, that goes away. It doesn't really go away. It's there, right?
And
It's
a
just
lot of
that,
times we'd like it to go away.
yeah.
But yeah, the reactive is when fear's in the driver's seat.
Mhm.
And the more conscious we get, we can go, you know what? Right now, fear is in the driver's seat, but my team needs me to
Mhm.
operate from a different place. But I'm self-aware enough that I know this fear is running in me. So I ask, what is the purpose that I can best serve in this next meeting with my team? What do they need? What does the organization need? And we begin asking purposeful questions that place this young one in the child seat in the back seat, put them in the seat belt, and we take over driving the car. They may still be
Mhm.
screaming, no, but we're driving.
That's really another thing that I've been thinking about is we're becoming like COVID has forced us even more to work across countries and cultural lines. So like if you think of somebody like working with somebody, let's just say right now in Afghanistan, where there's a lot of fear, right? So like from their perspective, it's different from somebody like maybe in the Western world, they're going to be thinking about something else. So as a leader, like trying to empathize and trying to at least acknowledge that somebody else may not be at the same what is it called, like on hierarchy of
Level of
needs
development.
because in a sense I'm trying to satisfy my basic safety needs where you already got that met and you're thinking about. So
Yeah.
is it also about awareness when it comes to leadership in organizations, being aware of that cultural context, right?
The cultural context, yes. And, if you think about Afghanistan, trauma is,
Mhm.
we've got a whole country in trauma right now,
Mhm.
wherever, whether they're holding the guns or
Yeah.
whether the guns are being held on them. The whole
And I'm
country.
just using that as an example. There are so many other places. I mean, I tell people, like, even, going back to the Balkans, it's the same thing. Like people have gone through wars, like, and like they have certain beliefs. There's even like cultural stuff where like, this is, you're supposed to be told what the elder tells you or do what the elder tells you. So it's as we continue to collaborate and work across the globe, I think one of the key things for leaders will be to understand a little bit more and empathize with people that are not part of their culture.
Completely. Yes. Some cultures are much more cerebral, much more
Mhm.
just here.
Mhm.
Other cultures are more this. Like
Mhm.
when we're coaching a lot of Asian cultures, there is very much a complying
Mhm.
part of how they grow up, that can have more of a reactive piece to it, but it can also have in its full blossoming in the creative, it can be
Mhm.
a looking out for all my team and being respectful of elders and those who have more, but not saying, not holding back when something needs to be said.
He
So
said, yeah.
there's a, yeah, respecting, getting to know. And again, that's where curiosity with these times and our work, it's a real key, curiosity. Yeah.
Great. So maybe as we're finishing here, what is something that you would like to leave the audience with? What is maybe a message or something to think about when it comes to leadership, when it comes to wholeness, uh, and being a better leader?
Yeah. um Two things that I would ask you all to just be thinking about. And the first would have to do with the circle in the desert. What is the circle that is still keeping you more contained than you need to be, that is still keeping you operating from some level of fear and should versus a more natural flowing of your gifts out into the world. And to, as you let yourself, you might even, as you're walking one day, imagine there's a line in the sand in front of you. What is keeping you from crossing that line, and what is inviting you to step over? What would call you to enter the larger desert? What's a purpose that inspires you right now in this day and time? Because purpose will pull you further and further into your wholeness. It's fear and safety that keeps us acting in these labels, roles, containers that are too small for what the world needs right now.